other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. John 10:16. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. John 10:16.
The sound of arrival echoed through the chamber, welcoming a new guest. Her name was Alice. Drowsy and dazed, Alice found herself alone, except for a peculiar door marked with the number 430, a number that clashed with the 431 engraved on her left hand. Curiosity boiled in her chest, urging her to approach the door and open it. But just before she could, something unexpected greeted her. A man, or rather something like one, stood before her. He was the serpent, a being that delighted in the presence of newcomers after decades of solitude. Introducing himself, the serpent explained the rules. From now on, she needed only to rest in her assigned room and wait for the grand event, the mansion's banquet. He added that this place held a wondrous gift. Any desire could become reality. She need only imagine it, and it would be granted. Surrounded by mountains of sweets and desserts, Alice indulged. Before leaving, the serpent issued one single warning: never, under any circumstance, leave the room.
That smell.
Time passed. Having devoured all the treats with ease, Alice's attention returned to the same place, the door. She finally opened it. Stepping outside, her curiosity led her into the unknown, only to be struck by a sudden pain in her right hand. Before she could understand what had happened, the serpent's furious voice interrupted her thoughts. She was immediately dragged back into the room. What had just occurred, the serpent explained, was a side effect of the mansion. Leaving your assigned room causes your body to rot. There were 431 rooms in total, each created the moment a new guest arrived. But there was a limit. Room 666 would be the last. And with it, the long-awaited banquet would begin. A strict rule governed the mansion. No guest could ever leave. It was a steep price to pay for having one's wishes fulfilled. Alice voiced her discontent. She had no desire to attend any banquet. To her, the outside world still held beauty and hope. Faced with her stubbornness, the serpent revealed something else. There was a way out. It was simple, at least in theory. She had to descend room by room, all the way down to room 0. Without hesitation, Alice prepared to begin her journey. But the serpent held her back and added one final warning. Between her and the exit stood 430 rooms, and the further she got from her own, the more her body would rot. Her small frame could collapse long before ever reaching the bottom. It was suicide, no doubt about it. Yet, driven by her stubborn will, or perhaps something deeper, Alice chose to move forward. And so began her reckless journey through the uncanny mansion of wonders.
Over here! I knew it. This smell.
This was room 430. The rot had begun to take hold, eating away at her fragile body. Before her stood a solemn courtroom, ancient and eternal. The judge had spoken. The first sinner entered. Alice watched as the trial unfolded before her eyes. The man confessed to having bullied a classmate, breaking him down until he nearly committed suicide. Nearly, but that didn't matter to the accused. He felt no remorse. In fact, he had enjoyed it. The verdict was swift, execution, without hesitation. His headless body collapsed to the ground, and what remained was the weight of his wickedness burned into Alice's memory. Suddenly, the serpent appeared, gently pulling her aside. "This is not something a child should witness," it whispered. But the trial continued. The courtroom did not care. The second sinner entered. The guest of room 430 was a man filled with resentment. He had used his wish to kill the same person again and again, day after day, year after year, surrounded by an army of loyal soldiers who fed his vengeance. The scene was grotesque. A current of rage filled the room, flowing like a bloodstorm from wall to wall. Alicia stood frozen, spellbound by the spectacle, unaware of the serpent calling her name. At last, she turned away. Her journey resumed. She left behind a man who had been given the power to do anything, and yet lacked the will to fix even one thing. The guest of room 430 would never hear an apology from his abuser, and he would never find peace.
Hup! It's close.
This was room 413. Alice entered humming softly, barely paying attention. Before her stretched nothing but a vast emptiness. The world itself seemed to have turned upside down. Without warning, her body was caught by something soft and immense. A floating cushion soaring through the skies. The room's guest had taken the form of a massive bird. This person had wished to be free, free from borders, free from human conflict, free from war. They longed to shed their humanity completely. During her flight across the clouds on the back of the great bird, the serpent returned. Once again, it questioned her determination to leave the mansion. Her answer was clear. She didn't hesitate. The serpent could not understand. It had been born and raised within these walls. The only glimpses it had of the outside world came from its guests. Guests who had rejected that world and wished it away. To the serpent, wanting to leave the mansion was like throwing away happiness itself. Alice understood that. But her desire was not for an artificial world built on illusions. She longed for something real, even if it came in pieces, even if it hurt. She simply hated lies.
Should be around here, though.
This was room 385. The rot had consumed one of her arms. Uncertain and uneasy, Alice greeted the silence. A moment later, a monstrous creature lunged at her, nearly killing her on the spot. But then, a man appeared. A superhero. With strength and resolve, he struck down the creature. He was the guest of room 385, a misfit, a man who had abandoned the world, fled responsibility, and renounced maturity, all to become a hero, strong, admired, invincible, locked in an endless battle against the monster that demanded he face the truth. Alice chose to move on. Her journey resumed. She left behind a man who would remain trapped in his lie. The guest of room 413 would never mend the broken world, and the guest of room 385 would never make peace with his demons.
There you are.
Room 366, a chain-smoking addict who had become one with his vice. Room 359, a one-man orchestra who fused with his music. Room 339, a naturalist who took root in the world itself. Room 330, a nymphomaniac drowning in lust. Room 324, an astronaut defying the universe. Room 312, a star among the stars. Room 306, a lover of money. Room 298, someone who simply refused to grow up.
Smells like my little brother. Let's go home.
This was room 285. The rot had consumed half of her body. Panting and trembling, Alice dragged herself through a narrow hallway, her thoughts overwhelmed by a single desire. She wanted to eat. What greeted her was unusual, a quiet place, almost domestic, like a real home. Inside, a family spotted her. They seemed to recognize her as a student of the man of the house. But when Alice invited him to leave with her, to escape to the real world, a storm of hatred was directed at her, a storm from someone frozen in time. The serpent appeared again. It praised her for how far she had come, but added that her invitation had been pointless. That man desired nothing from the outside world. The guest of room 285 had once been a professor of ethics, but his life and ideals were far removed from what he taught. He had become a prisoner of his own impossible doctrines, his vices, and the unbearable weight of reality. He hated change. To him, change was a curse. And so, he used his wish to create a world without it, a place outside of time, a still perfect illusion where nothing would betray him, a frozen paradise. Alice didn't fully understand. Or maybe she did, but either way, she knew continuing was the only choice. She resumed her journey. The guest of room 285 remained trapped in time, clinging to the sweet memory of a distant past. This was room 276. Alice, now staggering and nearly consumed by decay, moved slowly through a garden of crimson roses. A woman blocked her path, questioning her reason for continuing. To her, the outside world had nothing to offer, nothing but pain. Alice tried to argue, but her voice was drowned by the woman's powerful presence. In her memories, the world had brought only suffering. And that suffering had planted something unshakable inside her. Her determination stirred Alice's curiosity. Alice asked if there was truly nothing the woman missed from the real world, and that's when the woman's beautiful facade finally crumbled, revealing the truth beneath. The guest of room 276 had once used her wish to become eternally beautiful. Her past was full of sorrow, abandonment, and grief, wounds that had turned her beauty into venom. A parasite, that's what they had called her. In the end, she had found no other escape. So when the mansion opened its doors, she embraced it like salvation. The outside world had stolen everything from her. Inside this room, untouched and eternal, she could finally be who she wanted to be. The roses around her bloomed with fragile splendor, their red petals dripping like blood. They radiated beauty, momentary and fleeting, beauty that, like life itself, vanished in an instant. Alice had to keep going. Her time was running out. The guest of room 276 would remain beautiful forever, her only witness, her mirror. That room, once filled with a girl and a small book, now sank into silence. A silence so pure and terrifying, it echoed like the beginning of a nightmare. The final hour was drawing near. This was room 268. The rot was moments away from consuming her entirely. Alice's mind drowned in a storm of voices, scattered thoughts and emotions flooding in from every direction. They were the mad echoes of countless souls. Crawling through a distorted space, she heard laughter. The serpent. He watched her closely. She had come farther than he ever expected, but now, her end had finally arrived. The serpent spoke again. Just like Alice, the guest of room 268 had once tried to reach the exit, the path that led to the so-called room 0. But this twisted space around her, lacking any defined form, was all that remained of that guest. Someone whose soul, stripped of a body, had been dragged back to its room, forced to wait for the banquet. Memories, thoughts, feelings, all reduced to nothing. The serpent offered one last warning. Alice didn't listen. She moved forward, her body on autopilot, her will forged in something far beyond understanding, a reckless determination, a foolishness so pure it could only be described as human. The serpent couldn't comprehend it. He didn't need to. The truth was simple. The exit was a lie, a fantasy built to be unreachable from the start. The serpent wondered how much longer it would take for the banquet to begin. There were still 235 guests missing. Then, with a sigh, he vanished once more, dissolving into the bitter murmurs born of humanity's foolish devotion to desire. Terror hung in the air, thick and unbearable. A mass of broken beings cried out for salvation. But salvation would not come. The beast was near, and their beliefs would not save them. The final hour had arrived. This was room 255. Alice awoke to find her body submerged in a strange container. Her thoughts raced until something unbelievable happened. Her decayed body had returned to normal. Then a man appeared. He approached and released her with a calm, almost clinical demeanor. He thanked her. She had served as a valuable test subject. More voices joined in. They all sounded exactly the same. The guest of room 255 was a researcher. He had wished to clone himself, to study the mansion like a living organism. To him, it was a book, one that needed to be read and dissected. These clones had found Alice collapsed near the room's entrance. Seeing how close she was to death, they injected her with an experimental drug, a compound capable of temporarily suppressing the rot. It was a one-time cure, a last resort. Alice, half curious and half irritated, questioned why the drug could only be used once. The scientists responded with something more valuable than medicine: knowledge. They knew the mansion's secret. Once the book reached 666 guests, it would fuse their flesh and souls into a single monstrous being, the grand feast the serpent longed for. Every wish the book granted corroded its owner's heart, transforming them into something incompatible with the outside world. Each tenant, lost in their own illusion, was condemned to remain in their room, rotting along with their desires. The scientist continued. There was a hidden system in place. The closer one got to room 0, the faster the rot spread. Passing through the lower floors, even just one room below 100, was almost instant death. The truth was clear. Reaching the exit had always been impossible. Alice, calm and expressionless, asked a final question. Who is the real guest of this room? Her words sent the clones into chaos. Each one claimed to be the original. Trapped in their own ego, they screamed and cursed at themselves, arguing endlessly, while Alice, with a faint smile, turned and walked away. The guest of room 255 had lost himself in his own mind, in a world where only he existed. He would never know who was the copy and who was the original, even though they were all the same person. Room 254, Room 249, Room 237, Room 220, Room 189, Room 176, Room 120. The race had begun. Time was running out. Alice's mind had long since abandoned her, but her will kept her body moving, automatic, relentless. Suddenly, the serpent appeared once more, mocking her, laughing at her ruined state, but Alice didn't respond. She simply kept running. Madness gnawed at her thoughts. But one warning still echoed in her mind, the danger of the lower floors. Until she reached it, the first real wall. The first door where the difficulty would triple. Room 99. Just opening it would be enough to kill her. And that was it. Alice was dead. The serpent, who had known this outcome all along, watched with joy. Another foolish guest had fallen, but then, a miracle, silent, almost invisible. Like a torn cocoon, something began to stir, and the broken girl on the ground started to rise. It was unbelievable. The girl who had once been nothing but shattered flesh on the floor was now standing, whole, untouched, alive. The serpent was shaken. Before his eyes stood an error, an exception, a crack in the system. Alice smiled, not mockingly, but with quiet defiance. Then she ran forward, straight back into death. Room 98, Room 97, Room 96. She tore through each door like a demon possessed by freedom, shattering the rules again and again. The serpent couldn't keep up. He didn't understand. How could she keep dying and coming back? Theories raced through his mind. Was she immortal? Was she a glitch? Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Alice had died not once, but dozens of times. And still, she kept going. Through the frenzy of resurrection, the rooms vanished beneath her. Room 35, room 23, room 18, room 11, and finally, room 0. The journey was over. She had done the impossible. She entered the first room, or perhaps the book's index. The serpent demanded an explanation, but Alice only offered a few meaningless words. She had a story to tell, a tale that began on an island with a princess, but she would save it for later. And with that, she walked away from the mansion of lies and fantasies and into freedom. Room 431 was now empty. The banquet would be delayed. But then, the sound of arrival echoed once again. The serpent hoped maybe it was Alice coming back. But instead, he saw something far more overwhelming. Dozens of new guests flooded the mansion. One after another, they poured in like lambs to slaughter. The serpent didn't understand, but he didn't need to. All that mattered was the ringing of the bell. 599, 600, 634, 663, and finally, guest 666. The mansion was full. The feast could begin. The wait was over. A burst of light, a wave of tentacles. The serpent transformed, becoming a predator driven by hunger and madness. His first stop was the room he had long desired. Inside waited a poor soul who had no idea what was coming. Without hesitation, the serpent devoured him, flesh and soul. Power surged through his new form. The banquet had begun. Room by room, the hunt advanced. Every door opened to a new victim, a new story, a new offering. The mansion echoed with screams and silence. The book writhed. Each guest, once human, once dream-filled, became nothing more than food, fertilizer for a machine of pure destruction. The serpent was ecstatic. Descending rapidly, consumed by the thrill, he longed for one thing, to reach the humans outside and purge them all. Finally, he stood before it. Room 0, the very door Alice had crossed. The book of the end was open, and the serpent, like a demon, like a rider of the apocalypse, had stepped into the world, ready to bring about its destruction. A perfect destroyer. Before him stretched the real world, a place he had only known through the desires and regrets of his guests. Now, for the first time, he could see it with his own eyes. He moved forward, searching, breaking, laughing. But something felt wrong. There was no one there. Impatient, the serpent unleashed a devastating blast, a warning to whoever might be hiding. That's when he heard it. A melody, a voice, calm, playful, familiar. Alice stood before him. The serpent tried to speak, but Alice simply continued where she had left off. A long time ago, in a certain land, on a certain island, there lived a princess. This princess was terribly ill. She had only one wish, to be free. But she had been sick since birth. The fever never left her. Only books brought her comfort. Enraged, the serpent demanded she stop, but Alice ignored him. The princess had a gift, an extraordinary memory. She only had to read something once to remember it forever. She devoured hundreds of books, driven by a hunger for knowledge and a desire to find the truth. And eventually, she devised a plan to create the ultimate manuscript, a book that would contain all other books. She gave it a name, the Book of Truth. And when it was complete, creator and creation became one. The book began to absorb the knowledge around it. Everything was words, everything was memory. The Book of Truth could transcribe every emotion, every thought, every human memory. It had no end. Not even storms or fire could stop it. The book was not invincible, however. It had a weakness. Humanity discovered that weakness and used it to fight back, combining classical texts with ancient magic. They sealed the book in a coffin from hell. The Great War of Biblioclasm had ended. The world rejoiced. Time passed. People moved on. But humanity, in its thirst for power, could not resist temptation. They used the princess's research to create copies, short, incomplete fragments of the Book of Truth. These books could only absorb the memories of those they consumed, but that was enough. They were weapons. During the development process, disaster struck. The main research facility was sabotaged. The books were burned. Some charred fragments survived and were scattered across the world. More time passed, and the world, as always, pretended to forget. They forgot the book they had once sealed until the day they were forced to remember. It happened exactly 1,786 months and 14 days after the end of the Great War of Biblioclasm. The Book of Truth opened again. Humanity, naive and blind, didn't understand. They didn't grasp the magnitude of what had returned. A being of knowledge and hunger was awake, ready to consume the world. Panic spread. Misinformation only made it worse. Some ignored it, others dismissed it, until the threat knocked on their door. A demon, starved for truth, was devouring everything. Nations fought back. They launched every weapon they had, but it wasn't enough. Even when they turned again to the old weapons of Biblioclasm, the book had already consumed too much. The second war between books and men had begun and ended quickly. The books had won. With her story finished, Alice revealed the truth behind the sudden arrival of so many guests. The answer was simple. She had fed them to him, one by one. She had emptied her pantry, offering soul after soul to the book she carried in her hand. And once she ran out of stored flesh, she began consuming the people nearby. That's why the world was empty. The serpent stood frozen, terrified, speechless. He understood now. He wasn't the only book. He wasn't special. Because right in front of him stood Alice, the stubborn, fearless girl from room 431, the girl who reached the end, the one who could not die. She was the Book of Truth. Alice had always known about him. She had opened the serpent's book out of sheer curiosity. She simply wanted to see what her little brother contained. Nothing more. The serpent stared at her, trembling. With a quiet smirk, Alice launched a casual attack. Like swatting a fly, she sliced off one of his arms. The insect tried to flee, but laughter echoed through the ruins. Alice had a new idea, a wicked one. She wanted to run an experiment. If that pitiful 666-page book could do nothing but eat souls, then maybe, just maybe, feeding it more knowledge could be fun. The serpent ran, but it was pointless. Alice closed in, and then she began. She overloaded the little book with information, forced it to grow, flooded it with memories, thoughts, sensations, joy, grief, strength, fear, desire, regret. Every truth of the world was inscribed into the serpent's trembling form. He began to break. Everything he was, every hesitation, every desire, every envy, every lie was absorbed, archived, catalogued. One more entry in the endless library of the one who existed only to learn. That was her wish and her only joy. As the sun bled across the sky, the book of truth was finally complete.
Although there's probably nobody left to read it now.